Sameness surrounds us. Now we have little categories in which we keep our pleasure separate. There can no longer be a genuine, original local culture. It will be swallowed by this universal phenomenon. There are a whole set of Muslim worlds that have appeared suddenly. You have the Tatars of the Kazan area, which have the most fascinating architecture, which nobody teaching Islamic architecture has ever heard of.
He's become a great model as a mentor. And so those of us who have subsequently mentored other people have done it in his example, I think.
Professor Grabar, last year at the Historian of Islamic Art and Architecture, which was a big conference, many of those people were your students. And when you started this, I remember that when you started, there were not that many people who, especially in the United States and Canada, who were specialists in this field. But since then, you've got many universities, in a lot of museums, you're curators of their sections and curators. How can you see that?
Well, the easiest way is to say, because I'm such a wonderful teacher that they all gathered around it and create. I mean, that's the other side. No, I think that in part it is true that it was a novelty to them. By the time I got, let's say, to be 40 or 45, and especially when I came to Harvard, it was very clear. The old Western field were tired. Oh, they still did their thing. They tortured, and suddenly something new was brought in. And Islamic art was one. The other one was Chinese art, and there is no doubt that Chinese and Japanese art have blossomed since then. Because it was something that was art, it was beautiful, but it was different. And I remember a great argument with one of my colleagues at Harvard at that time, who's at Johns Hopkins now, about the importance of Islamic art to understand contemporary art. That Clement Greenberg would have liked it. He didn't know much about it, but he would have liked it, he used to say. And that, I think, is true. That there is this interest, but what it has not had enough is, if you want theoretical support. If you study historiography, you start reading constantly about Rigaud, 10 German scholars do this, 5 French scholars do that, 2 Italian scholars do that. And so you have a whole scholarly philosophical equipment, which we don't have, because we don't know whether we should pick our philosophical base in the Muslim philosophical tradition or in the general philosophical tradition. In fact, I was reading recently about somebody who has been translating Nietzsche into Arabic. And I don't know whether it's important to translate Nietzsche into Arabic, but that is the kind of problem that comes up now. So if we go only to the local tradition, we'll think, I mean, yes, there'll be specialists. If we broaden it too much, it becomes elementary and superficial. How to find the balance between the two?
You bring up the question of theorization, and in what way the ideas of basing oneself on general theories of art, can be productive. I feel that coming from your work and then pursuing it separately, the idea of actually re-theorizing even the very beginnings of what the kind of art and visual culture that was created throughout the Central Islamic lands need a harder look. And so what I found most interesting about the mediation of ornament is that it is a gate to, or calls to, really returning to, okay, so what did the philosophers writing in the 10th, 12th century really say? How do you actually approach the idea of visuality within Islamic art? these are issues that I think have really very productive ways of being developed now.
Yes and no. Because I would say that most historians of art are not equipped to answer that question. We don't know languages well enough. We don't know the sources well enough. We don't know how many manuscripts have been published and not published, how many. So I don't think we have the full competence to deal with it. I'm fascinated in looking now, for instance, at how many historical texts of the early period have been published in the past 20 years that were unknown to me.
Right.
But that's
Okay.
in other words, I don't think, but that's not our job. Is not to look for text. That's the job of text people.
I know.
Our job is to look for visual impressions and visual evidence. And my use of the word theory then, and as you were talking, I was thinking about it, I think comes closer not to how I wrote this, but to the impact that I've had made on me, actually, the Institute for Advanced Study, by physicists and biologists. That is, that every moment lives with a theoretical framework, which changes every 5 years. You don't have to follow it forever. We tend to keep the same idea for 50 years, and they're going to become stale and boring. They change every 5 years, but they always have a grand theory. And they fit whatever they deal with to that grand theory. Then they change the grand theory. And they can do it because they are constantly working together. I think that there comes an important thing. As long as, and I go against my own life here, I mean, that as long as we work alone, we'll never find it.
But we don't work alone.
No, I tend to work alone.
No, I know, but...
I mean writing books. That's what counts.
No, but any number of us are actually not working alone, and actually part of it is your model.
So let them do that and prepare then the new theories that other people should be using. And to have little booklets that say, for this year, theory number 14 is going to be this or that, theory number 12 is this or that. And if it is, and immediately send it to Kuala Lumpur, to send it to every center where somebody is studying that field. If it remains among a bunch of buddies who meet every 6 months in the same colloquia, this is bad. We just had one like this at the Institute recently. And it is friends who meet and talk as friends to things they already know. It was fun, it was very pleasant, very agreeable. No results. It is, we should have brought people from Kuala Lumpur or whoever, from other places for this, not our local bodies. And I think that's what the Aga Khan Award has succeeded in some ways in doing. The seminars used to bring people from very different origins. It takes about 2 years to prepare a good seminar, a good thoughtful seminar. And that is something we tend to forget. It takes a long time to do. How long did your exhibition took to prepare?
Oh, they take years, 2-3 years at least.
That's right. And a good one is always takes a long time, but that's another story. But the point, however, is that theory, to me, is something you have to work. You have to deal with it, but you have to know that it's temporary. It will change in 5 years or 10 years or whatever.
Right, but the genesis of this theory, that is the genesis of that theorization, comes from where? And so here again, I'm returning to the question that Farrokh asked, which I think is a very important one, and this is, the field has changed, and there are many more practitioners. And so therefore, one person can no longer, or is no longer supposed to be the expert on everything from the Alhambra to the Taj Mahal in the same depth and the same theorization. You can't. So because you have many more people, you can actually set the variety of students and subsequent people.
Who's doing the setting?
In a way, this happens almost in a generational way. Look, here's Mohammad. He is 10 years younger than Glenn, who did his dissertation 10 years before, after I did. Okay, so in fact, you're looking at 3 completely different kinds of even pursuits. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, there is
a kind of to answer for.
Yeah, there is a dynamic in the kinds of issues that are taken up, and then in the arc of the careers that are chosen, and these are not just happenstantial.
Yeah, but that brings us to another issue, and a very important one. Unfortunately, careers are no longer chosen. Careers are chosen by deans and directors of museums and who organize things. But that's a...
But I would say there's a slightly different way of looking at that, which was 30 years ago, if you'd talked about Islamic art or architecture, the study, the practice of it was really grounded in the university. And I think in part because of your own teaching, but also in part because of the impact of programs like the Aga Khan program in architecture, it has exploded out of the university, and it takes place in museums, it takes place at architectural schools, and that there's actually emerging a fairly rich conversation now that brings together people from within the university, both in the United States and Europe, and throughout the Islamic world, and I think especially of centers like Istanbul and Cairo that have really generated a thoughtful discussion. And I wonder, as you look at that, whether that's something that you see as beneficial and whether it's grabbing at important issues.
Well, if it was true, it would be beneficial. But I'm not as optimistic as you are in saying it. First, one point of detail. The involvement of the field in museums is older than architecture. I mean, collections began in the 18th century, the 19th century, collecting of objects of one kind or another, but that's a detail. In general, yes, these conversations do exist, but I think that conversations within institutions are very recent. For instance, in all my years at the University of Michigan, even at Harvard for many years, I had practically no contact with the School of Architecture. Or with my colleagues in art history, only with medievalists, no that connection. There was this, because this comes out of another instinct, which is the instinct of curiosity that makes you want to broaden what you are thinking about, that what you're thinking about is not limited, it's not small, it's big, it has something broader than what people think it is. And I think that there, progress is enormous. I don't know whether it works in Near Eastern countries, but I mean, I know there are people in Istanbul. Cairo is less strong right now, but there are people who get it. Whether they have connection with each other, I don't know. Whether the architects have connection with the university, I simply have no idea. And that is something which, it is very important, but with connection with them and also connection with the media, with the press, with magazines. I think that this is something which is, it's even interesting in seeing how, from my recollection, the Aga Khan Award was mentioned in the New York Times the first 2 or 3 times. Then it was no longer interesting, it was no longer news, so they stopped even mentioning the award. And how do you get it, re-energize people into thinking about this? I don't know. It would be an interesting thing. I mean, you probably have to hire some great actress to open the Aga Khan Award meetings, so that they, I mean, to create a dramatic social event, to get opera to be. I don't know, but there may be something. I mean, to attract, because the general public gets easily tired, and it has to be constantly fed.
A defining moment in the field for you and for many of us has been the founding of the Aga Khan Award for Architecture. In many ways, it brought a historically defined field into contact with the present. And for someone like you, who's been a student of the past, and for a long time even a student of early Islamic architecture, you suddenly found yourself having to communicate with the present. And you've done that actually quite well. And many, I think, students were expecting you to basically comment, to inform us on the present. What do you feel someone like you, who's been grounded in the study of the past, has to say or offer to those who are concerned with the present?
That's very tricky, because in a way you say it's true. But I do remember an episode where the great Hassan Fathi and I was sent by the Aga Khan Award to Amman to give a talk together. 400 people showed up. Everybody listened to Hassan Fathy. Nobody was interested in what I had to say, because the architect himself, the creator, was what they were interested in, not what some professor has to say. I think that deep down I cannot say something, I can answer questions. And my competence does not, I haven't reached, and never will reach now, the level of prophethood, that is where I made pronouncements and expect people to follow them. What I can do is to, I may have done it occasionally, but what I may do better and prefer to do is to answer questions. That what are the questions they have, and can I provide answers for them? And I think that that is a more appropriate way of handling the changes that have taken place. That now the changes in most of this world are changes of which I'm only indirectly, I'm not directly involved, I'm not conscious. They are not any longer people with whom I share as much as I shared with their grandparents. And this is interesting, that I remember going to universities in many parts of the Middle East where you only spoke French, English, or German. Now, if you don't speak Arabic, Persian, or Turkish, you don't communicate with anybody. So that there is a completely different approach and attitude that exists, and it is, and so I have to react to their answers. And I think that one has to develop new people. I mean, a new form. That's a job for teachers of today, to develop people with new questions and new ideas.
And now, after 60 years of your career and over 70 doctoral students you've had, what are your recommendation, or what you think about, you can say to all these new students, all these younger generation of architects and historians who are trying to get in the field?
Oh, well, I think two things are always. One is study. Look and read. Now, I still am a great for reader and for writing. Writing is hopeless. I mean, they're not likely to do it. But read, they can still do it. And look, certainly they can do. And the second thing, and the more important one, is find the things that matter in your time. I will go back to the meeting of Hassan Fathy and me in Amman, where Hassan Fathy, who was a man much older than me and so forth, in talking to the Jordanian students of, I guess, 30 years ago, students of architecture, was telling them, imagine you are Bach and Beethoven. What would you do? Now, he could have said the Beatles, which was, they probably knew about the Beatles much more than they knew about Bach and Beethoven. In other words, you have to know the contemporary world, which I no longer know. I've stopped someplace 30 years ago. And so it is a matter for an analysis of the contemporary world, the questions of the contemporary world, and from there to come to then to old people like me and say, hey, we are interested in that. Do you have anything to say about this? Should we read this? Should we do this? Whatever it is. But the point is that the questions have to come from them, from their needs and desires, and cannot be imposed from somebody like me. Now, there is the intermediary generation represented here. They still are in the possible, they can make general propositions. They can develop theories. I've passed that stage. They can develop theories, they can develop ideas, and hopefully persuade younger people to ask questions. But the main thing is to ask questions, and to ask questions freely, not to feel hampered by what it is gender matters, what it is national matters, ethnic, religious. To give you a little example that happened to me recently, I was criticized in a journal by a Muslim commentator that I use the word Islamic and don't talk about religion and talk about a secular Islamic art. And she, that person, I think it's a woman, said this is an impossibility. You cannot have a secular Islamic art. Now, I think she's wrong, but that's besides what. I agree that the word Islamic is wrong. It's a bad word. But the discovery of the new vocabulary, the new questions, that is for young people to do. It's not for people like me to impose on them anymore.
Thank you very much, Professor Grabar. Thank you, Mohammed. Thanks, Glenn and Renata, to being with us. And thank you all for being here.